as catalyst, for our customers, I think it's important to identify, these people that can play an active role inside the organization, make sure that they are supported, make sure that their visions and make sure that their visions is understood as well, by the leadership, and creating a common agenda. That's something we've learned.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And I am thrilled today to have as a guest a good friend of mine, Franck Cormier. Welcome, Franck.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you.
Franck is the lead partner and president of Smarttasking, a consulting professional services org whose mission is to empower businesses to work smarter, faster, and better. He's performed crazy roles all over the world as executives at AT&T, Equant, BT, and Vodafone, where I had the great pleasure of working with him, driving innovation and transformation into Vodafone. He is truly a global citizen, having lived in France, the UK, UAE, and again, happily for me, just down the road in Boulder, Colorado. And I loved this in your bio. Franck operates at his best when the cards are being redistributed, when the context appeals for reinvention, when bringing the team together matters most. I just love how you said that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was the high level, but we'd love to hear about your journey. Tell me a little bit about, your catalytic journey, maybe sharing a few career highlights that you're proud of to see sort of the catalytic thread throughout.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I will illustrate, probably using what we do for customers, in Smarttasking. One of the recent example of, was in, for a services organization who was actually confronted to, margin erosion problems. And we did a pricing review. We studied a little bit the pricing, on the competitive landscape, and we reviewed this, the different, wall points. And it became apparent, very quickly that actually they were underpricing their services. And there was some resistance, internally to do, an increase of the price. And we tried to obviously characterize and factualize, what we meant in this respect. And at the end, the leadership team, trusted us, and we started to increase gradually. And if the price point were, for example, at 100, right, we gradually increased, slowly the prices. And we noticed that at 117, actually, this was the inflection points for the price. And they started to reduce, it started to affect, the volumes of the services that they were selling. But they had 17, up to 17s, it didn't have any effect. So bringing the leadership together, make them think a little bit, differently, trying to highlight, the differentiators and the value that were provided was an element. And so we helped them, and it was quite, an exercise to convince, particularly the sales organization, as you can imagine, that they needed to increase their price gradually. But that was an example of the things that what we do, for customers. Another example was a very large organization which had been fast growing in Europe. I was still in Europe at that time, and they were very, very fast growing. And in order to be, scaling their services organization, they needed to reorganize. And whereas in the past, each of the different country leaders, they had a service person, and he or she was responsible from pre-sales, to operations. The group had decided that they would implement a different model and actually verticalize and specialized all the different functions, forming part of the services organization. So you had pre-sales, technical, you had, project and program management, you had, architects, for the implementation, and of course, the different layers of support. And that created a level of tension, for the customers, the people who were, historically managing a large patch with, a fair amount of the, complexity. All of a sudden, they were responsible for delivery, as an example, in this particular country. So we were selected, and I was the lead partner at that time on this project to try to make the team, collaborate to results. So creating with them, first of all, it started with understanding in the new world, what their respective, accountabilities and what success meant for each of them. And having done that, we started to create a common agenda and try to bring them on a path where the collaboration, would be actually creating more value for each of them rather than, what they would be able to perform, individually. So it was not a technical, but it was really, listening to the resistance point, bringing a bit of emotional intelligence in the world of engineering, and trying to figure out, how they could basically, disrupt the market together by, by better, collaborating. Another example that comes to mind is one of our client. Actually, they had built. It was a software organization. It is a software organization, and they had built originally solutions. And the problem with solutions is that you can have as many as solutions that you have customers, and you reach a point, and you reach a point where you need to rationalize a little bit your product. Otherwise, it's not scalable. And what happens when you produce a new release and you have to upgrade with all the custom development which has been made for each of the different clients? So they had made the decision that they wanted to move towards becoming a product house. But what happens for key customers in that case was, you all of a sudden stop any further customization of what is provided, to the customers. So they have to hold. So you are holding their business, right, at some point until such time that you. So they had a threat, from one of their major clients who did not subscribe, originally to the approach, and this customer was more than a third of the annual revenue of the client. Wow. That was quite significant for all of them. So they called on us and they asked us, what would you do? How would you approach that? You have to reconcile the two imperative, which is, you cannot be anything to anyone, and in the same time, you have to find a way to sustain your business with, the key clients. And so it became apparent after, doing some discovery and, speaking to engaging with the client, first of all, they didn't need all the features that they asked for. I mean, some were obviously imperative, some were more nice to have. So we had, to reprioritize a little bit the roadmap and to agree basically with the leadership team of this client, a roadmap where we would have a common core. And we will differentiate, based on the customers, based on the criticality of each of these customers, what they would do or what they wouldn't do. And more interesting is that actually the features that we agreed to develop on top of the core product were also used by some other client. So it became part, for most, it became part of the core product. So then they could scale, they could build, a support organization, that would be trained to support these different additional features. And we managed to get, this particular client on board. I mean, the contract was renewed, and it was actually expanded to Asia, which was a great success for this organization. And we did that, with in the space of 6 months. It took a little bit of time, as you can imagine, to I sat on the R&D center at the time, with the client, and we take pride of what we've been able to, help, as a customer.
6 months doesn't seem that long, first of all, but especially for the level of change. What's fascinating to me is the examples that you just gave are things when you're talking about change or disruption in these core areas, which is like revenue, the salespeople, you're like, I'm going to play with that, right? Culture. You guys have been working this whole way. It's like the deep bowels of the organizational structure. And the last one is like potentially disrupting your largest customer. How did your sort of catalytic, those are some of the places where you're going to get the absolute biggest resistance. How did your catalytic nature help you overcome those things?
When we start, as an organization, and me, and it's part of our the way that I work, when we engage generally, it's in the context of, change programs or transformation that the customers are doing. Whether they're in the tech sector, we are management consultant and we come primarily from the technology sector, so we can act in different, capacity, from product development to sales to pricing to support and operations. Or sometimes we work for CIOs and CTOs of other organizations, and we are not in that case, management consultant because we don't know banking, we don't know insurance enough,
Right.
example, right? But there are three things that are super important to us. And that help us, being the catalyst, inside the customer organization. And these three things are things and lesson learned that we have, taken over the years. I mean, the first one is to think the future from the future. And what it means is that when you're undertaking, for example, I give you a practical example. One of our clients, was helping or providing a solution to migrate, legacy on-prem applications to the cloud. And we had been helping this customer in the context of a ministry in Europe. And you had legacy systems, you had job, description and job, people who were performing, you had system analysts, you had job schedulers. I mean, that these are jobs that existed when I started to work in the 90s at that time. But nowadays, when you are using public cloud or private cloud in their case, I mean, these jobs are actually outsourced to the cloud provider. And what became apparent is they didn't think the future from the perspective of helping the customer design his new organization. They were obviously a software engineering company. Extremely knowledgeable, and they had very fascinating product to help the transition of applications to the cloud. But nonetheless, the people side of things were not considered, and that was the resistance factor, right? And what's going to happen with me when this change is executed? So we help our client, but also our client design a people program whereby there will be new jobs and they will have probably to go to the market to find the adequate profile. But there was also an opportunity to bring the team together, by a reskilling program. So thinking the future from the future, I think it's something which is important. The second one is, I mentioned it already. I mean, it's bring the team together on an agenda. And super important, and as a catalyst, we as catalyst, for our customers, I think it's important to identify, these people that can play an active role inside the organization, make sure that they are supported, make sure that their visions and make sure that their visions is understood as well, by the leadership, and creating a common agenda. That's something we've learned. And the third thing is impact from the start. I mean, the tunnel effect. I mean, you need to create value, early in the transformation. Yeah. I mean, the tunnel effect, where in the old days you locked 20 people in the room, to develop something, and then it was supposedly coming a year after. These days are long gone, right? These days are long gone. So you need to prioritize what you will impact, obviously positively, in the people life, in the company life, in the company way of working, rapidly. All cannot be achieved, overnight, but you need to have a stepped approach to produce the value. And so we apply, these three principles, and thinking the future from the future, impact from the start, and most importantly, bringing the team together.
Amazing.
I love it. It's like amazing wisdom for all of us to action on right away. We're already talking about this term catalyst, and so I'd love to ask you, Franck, in your own words, how do you relate to the concept of catalyst?
Well, catalysts are, many characteristics in my opinion. I mean, first and foremost, they are part of the 10% who do 80% of the transformation in any organization. And there are troublemakers. There are people who can process a lot of information, in their own mind. They can look at the possibilities and what what's possible to achieve. How can we do better, faster, cheaper? For example, right? And soon they have an idea. I mean, before they formulate the ideas, generally they are processing the ideas. They are trying to imagine the challenge, and when they found a solution, then they are quite impatient generally because they are action driven, and they are action driven. And I think that's probably, I mean, they have as I said, they have a vision. They see the possibilities of doing things, improving, and they are quite, that, I mean, they are hard people, to manage also. I mean, you have to feed them, you have to leave them, a space so that they can express their creativity and yeah. And sometimes it works, as we know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But in the world where there is a lot of volatility, there is a lot of obviously uncertainty, and the pace of changes is still continuing to accelerate. I think these people are essential.
You mentioned in your 3 principles, bringing the team together and identifying who can play an active role. I was curious, in to your point that you were just saying there, is that often your catalyst, or tell me what you were referring to there in who can play an active role if these are the 10% that are doing 80% of the transformation?
Well, it varies from my experience, from the most important thing I think is the company culture, and you have to accept failure. And when when catalysts evolve in a world which is fast changing, I mean, generally the company has already somehow for some parts adapted to the new world, and they understand the requirement and the imperative to slightly change the game or to reinvent themselves. But sometimes you live in an organization who, when I started to work in telecoms, it was not unusual to sign 10 years deal. I mean, it was not the norm. I would say 5 to 7 years was the norm, especially for complex global outsourcing transactions. These days are gone. But when you sign 10 years, you have visibility. I mean, unless you do some, you fail on the quality of service or something which is independent to the contract execution happens on the customer side, generally you have predictability of your revenue stream for about 10 years. These days are gone. For most, they are gone. And this is where the company culture is important, and particularly at the leadership level, where you need to accept that some of the initiatives and ideas which will be incubated, tested, some of them will not scale. You have to accept that. You have to accept failure. Of course, you will not write a blank check as an executive, to your engineering or your innovation lead. You'll have, some control point, but you have to accept, failure as a, and I see a lot of resistance today. I see a fair amount of resistance, from CTOs and CIOs and in the space of AI, because the expectation from the leadership team is, we're going to give you X million dollars, to provide, to create, let's say an automation, whatever it is, and some, not all, of course, but some of the executive team would have the expectation that by introducing AI, this will have an immediate improvement on the bottom line. Whether and that's that's also an element of culture. Not sure if I'm answering right to your question here.
Absolutely, Shan, please.
Yeah. Yes, totally. And because what you just articulated is, you make the case. You need catalysts now more than you did 20 years ago, because the pace of business has changed, the level of uncertainty, the speed, all of that. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier, because it's like you shared all of the amazing attributes that catalysts can bring, but organizations will often focus on the thing that you said, which is it can be difficult to manage them.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering how you would communicate to executives and organizations why they need the catalyst and what they should do about it to overcome that potential resistance of, oh, you want me to find all my troublemakers and do what?
Find that trouble. I think it's a good, it's a good question here. And I think they, if they accept, that the world is fast evolving, first of all, and if they are being impacted and the cards are being redistributed, on the marketplace, then they need to react. And how do they react? They will do more of the same. They probably get the same results. And so they have to, think a little bit, as we commonly say, think a little bit outside the box and create a community of people who have experience in what they do, but also are, willing to share ideas and to discuss, what can be done, to in the context, whether it's, more competition, whether the program or the product, is a bit dated. What do they need to do in order to react? And they have to understand that, and this, catalyst also needs to be provided, they need to be provided with some, stewardship in terms of, evaluating their ideas, prioritizing their ideas, and also accepting that it's going to be a journey. Accepting that it's have to be a journey, and some of the catalysts, they have to reconcile, short-term imperative with long-term vision, and I think that's something which is important because for the reason that mentioned earlier, you have to impact from the start.
Quick wins to get the credibility, 100%, totally. And I think it's interesting, like when when we were working together at Vodafone, you started off with your answer of, well, if they accept that the pace of change is accelerated. In our innovation workshops, we used to have to make that case. But I think that now, like that's one maybe silver lining of the pandemic is like, you almost don't have to have that part of the conversation anymore. But thank you for that thoughtful answer. And so I guess like pivoting off of that, then as a Catalyst executive, because you've had some crazy roles, you were telling us like when you were CEO, you had 3 acquisitions in a quarter. So like as a Catalyst exec, what have been one or two of your biggest challenges, and what's helped you most in overcoming those challenges?
Some of the challenge I faced in my corporate career was to make a product organization coexist with a services organization. And the business model are not the same. One is a CapEx business. You invest a lot and then you do 80% EBITDA or 70% EBITDA as a return. And the other one is you have minimum, investment to start, and when you do 30% on a large scale services organization, that does, support, but also, implementation, you're doing well. And so one of the challenge I faced in my corporate world, and that applies to many telecommunication companies that I work for, is why would the executive the executive or the boardroom accept to be diluting the profitability, and they are measured by the analyst on the basis of the number of people, the EBITDA and the CapEx that they consume, and the volatility of the whole market. So I think bringing services into a product business is difficult generally, and because it's the economic model is very, very different. Why would we enter into also this complexity having to tailor potentially our service offerings to accommodate certain clients? And I understand that, I've been on two sides, of the fence, driving services organization, but also a heavily productized, delivery operations. So I understand the context. So that's one of the challenge that I face. The second one is, as I mentioned, I think is around accepting the failure on innovation, and that's
a
number of cases where you invest, you try to build something which is different. In these days, internet, was becoming a reality. So we were, building, what actually underpin today, the global economy. And this came with a number of innovation product. I mean, nobody talk about really, cyber security to the same extent that we are obviously now very dependent on cybersecurity for private personal data, but also enterprise data. So we had to, incubate but you had to, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. And that's two of the challenge that I faced around, making, these two business model and these two product line, coexist in the world. And there are very few organizations. If you look retrospectively at, there are very few organizations who manage to do that. And yeah.
I love where you landed with those two, because they are like so core to Catalyst executive challenges, because we're often brought in actually to disrupt the business model. And whichever direction it is, there's always the swing back and forth from, product to services or decentralized to centralized. And like, there's all of these things. And there's always these key stakeholders. And it's a problem really with global economy, in my opinion, which is also just like the quarterly earnings report, because that drives down so much of the resistance to any possible risk in the business model that you're doing. So I want to hear how you overcame that one, but also the exception of failure, like especially if you're the one that's been, again, brought in to drive it. How do you convince people to try it, but also tell them, hopefully set the expectation ahead of time, like, we have to try this. There's no other option, but I can't give you a guarantee that it's exactly going to work out the way that you hope it's going to work out. So how did you overcome those two challenges?
I think the first one was we established the proof point. And we, we started with a limited number of customers, and again, when you're doing 1 million, per year of revenue, and when you're doing 50 million, it's a different, obviously, consideration. So we started with those clients who first, wanted to have, a special service, in absence of a better word. And we started with that, and we started to scale the services layer, and it became very apparent very quickly, actually, about a year after that. First of all, the duration of the contract that we were able to secure with this client was much longer.
Nice.
Yeah. So instead of having to renegotiate the price every 18 months, each of the renegotiation translating into 20% cost reduction, we were, renegotiating the services, renegotiating every 3 years, and the value, for what was at that time a heavily commoditized, telecom product, with the value and the assessment of the performance was no longer based on connectivity only. It was based on the services that we were providing, through this customized service offering. So we could, first of all, extend, the duration of the contract, and also expand more. Expand more within the customer organization. It's not uncommon that, especially, large multinationals, they subscribe to the services for a division or for a group or for a region, and then we were able to demonstrate that on the basis of 2 or 3, example, but real life example, and then it became the norm. And I wouldn't probably name the organization that this I was with at that time, but when I met quite recently to some of the executives here in New York, they told us that actually this service offering was the majority of what they were selling today.
Amazing.
So that's not me only, clearly not, but it was the team effort to say, we're going to have this specific service. Yes, it's going to come with a 30%, gross margin as opposed to 80%, which was the core business. But if you combine the effect.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so what I hear in that was that you knew what the board and the street and everything, like you knew how to frame with data points to overcome the resistance. So that's really beautiful. And then how do you overcome or navigate that? Like, hey, we're going to innovate and we're likely going to fail once or twice.
Well, it's we didn't have any magic wand, you know. We just tried to. We had, you know, the resistance we had at that time. We tried to overcome it on starting with, you know, small steps that were, you know, the less, you know, controversial.
Yeah.
So we tried to contain, you know, the creativity of our catalysts to say, let's make some steps. And everybody was, you know, more or less on board that it needed to be done. But the way we did it was remarkable, you know, as the team. You know, we had speed, we had impact to the customer. So we started to build, you know, the confidence that it was not the temple of pure thoughts, if it translates. It was, right? It was practical.
Yes.
It was practical, adding value from the start, and also, and then we took them on a journey where we gradually moved the cursor to things which were more innovative. We obviously agreed, you know, to contain the investment, right, to test the market, to establish the proof point, also to productize, you know, that's also important. Even the services layer, you know, can be, you know, productized. I mean, the way of working, the methodologies, the processes, so that you can scale the business. And yeah, and I mean, maybe I should have started with that. We also focused the innovation effort and the resistance to, you know, to innovation, to accept, you know, the failure that could sometimes result on those opportunities who had potential to scale. We don't do more, right? Not so customized, you know, so specific to accommodate the customer needs that they have no opportunity, or there is no opportunity to generalize and to make it, you know, scale. And that's probably, you know, the way we approach that.
It's brilliant. Before I hand it over, I just want to synopsize. I love your intersection of like the hard-hitting business focus with the like catalyst experience behind it. So thank you. That was amazing. All right, Tracy, over to you.
Yeah, similar to Shan, I am so struck with the very tactical nature of what you're sharing with us that I think is such a gift to us and the listening audience of like, you know, like think about it. It's very strategic and it's very straightforward in making sure that you're thinking from a bottom line, you know, how are we going to drive this? And the culture, right? You're not forgetting that. So thank you. Thank you for helping breaking it down to break it down for us.
Thank you.
All right. As we wrap up, Franck, I'm so curious. Who are or is your favorite famous catalyst that is alive or dead, past, present? Someone who has inspired you?
I think I'll probably have two. I mean, one was my personal mentor. And, you know, he passed away, so I will not tell his name. His first name was Laurent. I was fortunate to work with him for about 10 years in different capacity and running my business finance group and M&A at that time. But he put me on a sort of, leadership development program with rotation. I worked for him as his EA, one of his EA. He was an officer in a large organization for 10 years. And it was about, you know, live my life. So when you are an EA, you know, you start probably 2 hours, you know, earlier than the executive. And you probably finish minimum 2 hours after him. And you make sure that you understand that, you know, all the different meetings and decision points are fully prepared so that they can, you know, perform. And he was this person, you know, who came was first, you know, he was very, very rational. I mean, he had this very, very strong engineering background, but he had an even more, you know, talent, you know, to bring the team together and showing and, emotional intelligence, you know, to the people. He had been very, very successful in his career prior to him and I worked together. He was part of IBM in these days. And, there was a book, you know, you probably remember, it started to be a little bit dated now, that was written by Lou Gessner, who said, you know, I made an elephant dance. And he was part of this leadership team who in these days, you know, transformed IBM, and made them, you know, a success. So he was really a mentor for me because first of all, he, you know, gave me the opportunity to develop. I learned so much about, you know, the people side of things, the organization development, yeah. So that's, somebody that, really inspired me. And it's also worth saying, it's the initial formatting. I was fortunate, and it was by really random, to very, very fortunate to be formatted by somebody like him, in my early days. And it's, when I look retrospectively, the people who were probably, more quality, but didn't have the opportunity to work for somebody like this, early in their career, I think it's impacting the rest of your career. It doesn't mean that it's unsurmountable, of course, when you have a bad start, but it's better to have a good start with somebody who is, inspiring and leading and bring the team together and, have a vision as well, has a vision. So that's somebody who really, inspired me. But he's not, he's not, I mean, he was in the industry a public figure, but he's not. The second person that I didn't know personally, but I work for his organization, and he really inspired me, in the industry. This person had other interest than business, and I'm not commenting on the other interest. That's not belonging to me, as a business guy. But this person was Ross Perot, and he built EDS in 1962. He was employed at IBM after when he left, the army, and he had a vision. And this vision, if I sum it up, is he created the cloud before time. And tried to convince at that time his leadership that some of the customers didn't have the financial surface, if you translate, right, to necessarily invest into proprietary systems. And he said, why don't we share the processing and the storage of this CPU to other customers? We'll put a dial-up line, and they can use our mainframe systems, right? And they will get a fraction of the cost. It did not resonate in that time. He went on his own. He created EDS. He actually invested, to help, Steve Jobs, right? When he left Apple before coming back and created Next. And he had built basically.
Ross Perot invested in Next?
Yes.
I didn't know this. I didn't know any of this about him. This is crazy.
Yeah, he invested in Next, and to my knowledge, yes, he did that, and he created what I witnessed, even today, was the best school for business management. I mean, from a process perspective, from a systems perspective. Do you imagine at that time, I was a junior guy, working in EDS, right, as a financial analyst to start, and then, and then as a manager. And we had an online real-time information systems, for each of the projects. And the people who were forecasting the development of the business with each of the individual accounts were the account manager. They accessed online these systems. Then it was absolutely phenomenal. And in terms of also financial evaluation, they were engaged in large outsourcing transactions at that time. The financial system that they had at least a decade. They were a decade ahead of time. And all of the competitors, I was in Europe at that time, but all, even the large scale, companies, and in Europe, they didn't have a clue. And I think I found, this company also, very, very inspiring thanks to its leadership. He had, as I said, I didn't work with him because he had already sold EDS at that time to General Motors, and it was a subsidiary of GM in these days. And what I found also amazing is when I started to work, there was a guy at the end of the corridor. He was the SVP for Southern Europe. And his name was Bill. And Bill had been arrested when he was running Iran together with one of his colleagues during the revolution in Iran in 1979. And Perot tried to get his people, released, using the American diplomacy at that time, did not succeed, and he didn't give up. He mandated you know, and he mandated, you know, he hired basically an ex-colonel of the special forces in the US. They created a commando. They penetrated Iran through Turkey, and they took them out. And that's called commitment.
This is the best history lesson ever, Frank. Thank you. Oh my gosh. We could talk for hours.
And there is a book called On the Wings of an Eagle that summarizes this story.
All right, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
And the person at the end is still alive. I exchanged with him about, you know, a year and a bit ago. He lives in Texas, Bill. And he was at the end of the, you know, he was the end at the corridor. And me as a junior guy was coming with us and telling us, you know, his stories. And I've got a book, obviously signed by him. And I found this leader, you know, Ross Perot, you know, as I said, I'm talking business. I'm not talking anything else. But from a business perspective, he had a vision.
Amazing.
He made the organization succeed, incredible and distinctive, you know, products and services.
Yeah.
And, he had such an unparalleled, you know, commitment to his employee that for me forced respect. Yeah.
I always love it when we learn about someone through fresh eyes. So thank you. This is giving us some summer reading. So thank you for that. And thank you for all of the gifts that you've shared today, Frank. It has been a pleasure to spend time with you.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and very pleased to, you know, connect with you. Thank you.
Appreciated. And thank you so much to our listening audience. If you'd like to learn about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com.
And if you enjoyed this episode as much as we did, thanks, Frank, please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you have a catalyst in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way.